When Lena Farrell stepped back from that doorway at 11:30 on a Thursday night, still in her heels, still holding her overnight bag, and said, "Ask me to stay, and I will." No one heard her. Not the neighbors behind thin walls. Not the street lamp flickering at the end of Grover Lane. And certainly not Patrick Hale, the single father who had spent the last 4 years learning how to love someone carefully, and still managed to get it wrong when it mattered most. But the rain heard her. And it answered. And Patrick Hale, standing in his doorway with his hand still on the frame, was about to make the kind of decision that a man only truly understands too late. She was worth more than he ever let himself believe. That was the problem. Though not in the way that gets printed on resumes or announced at board meetings. Though those things were true too, in ways Patrick didn't know yet, in ways that would eventually change everything about his world. But in the way that matters at 11:30 at night, when a woman has driven 40 minutes in the rain, rehearsed something brave in the car, stood on your porch and offered you the only thing she had left to give, herself. And still somehow, you hesitate. This is their story. And if you've ever stood in a doorway and chosen the wrong thing for all the right reasons, if you've ever been so afraid of breaking something that you let it slip right through your hands, then you already know how this feels. If you're watching from anywhere in the world right now, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. And if this story finds something inside you, hit that like button. You'll understand exactly why by the end. Now let me take you back. Not to that doorway. Not yet. Back further. Back to a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks earlier. Back to a school parking lot and a second-hand umbrella and a little girl named Rosie who, without meaning to, started the whole thing. The rain had been falling since morning. Not the kind that apologizes for itself, the soft gray mist that drifts through October like an afterthought. This was something heavier, deliberate, the kind that fills gutters and darkens everything it touches. The kind that makes the world feel like it's pressing down. Patrick Hale stood under the narrow overhang outside Crestfield Elementary with 9 other parents, all of them hunched into their jackets, all of them watching the doors. He had worked a double shift at Halverson Tool and Die the night before. He'd slept 3 hours. His boots were soaked through from the walk across the lot, and he had exactly $11 in his wallet until Friday. He wasn't complaining. Complaining required energy he'd learned to spend elsewhere. On Rosie. On making sure her lunch was packed before 6 a.m. On making sure the apartment was warm enough and the nightlight worked, and that she never, not once, felt the edges of how hard this actually was. He had been doing this alone for 4 years, 2 months, and 9 days. Not that he was counting. The doors of Crestfield Elementary opened at 3:20, and the children came spilling out the way they always did. Loud and sudden and bright, like something that had been held too long and finally let go. Patrick Hale spotted Rosie before she spotted him. She was 6 years old and small for it, wearing the yellow rain jacket he'd found at the Goodwill on Ferris Street for $4.50. It was slightly too long in the arms. He'd folded the cuffs up twice, and she still swam in it. But she wore it like it was something special, because he'd told her it was. Yellow's a brave color, he'd said when he helped her zip it up that first morning. Brave people wear yellow. She'd believed him completely, the way 6-year-olds believe everything their fathers tell them, with their whole chest, without reservation. That kind of faith was the most terrifying and the most beautiful thing Patrick Hale had ever been trusted with. Dad. She found him and ran. He crouched down to meet her and she hit him like a small, warm collision, arms around his neck, wet jacket against his cheek. Hey, bug. It rained all day. I know, I was standing in it. She pulled back and studied his face with the serious expression she'd recently developed, the one that made her look startlingly older than she was. Your hair is flat, she announced. Thank you. Very helpful. She giggled, and something inside Patrick's chest unclenched. The same thing that clenched again every morning when he dropped her off and wouldn't fully release until he had her back in his sight. 4 years of that. 4 years of this specific transaction. The drop-off dread, the pickup relief. He suspected it would never stop. They walked home through the wet. 14 blocks. He held her hand and let her jump in the puddles because she was 6 and the boots were already soaked and there was no argument worth having about it. She talked the whole way. About a boy named Chester who had eaten his eraser, about the cloud shapes from the window, about whether frogs liked rain or just tolerated it. He listened to all of it. He always listened to all of it. This was his life. These 14 blocks. This small hand in his. It hadn't always looked like this. There had been a version of it, not so long ago that he couldn't still feel its outline. Where there were 2 adults in the apartment on Grover Lane. Where someone else made coffee in the mornings while he got Rosie dressed. Where the weight of things was shared in the way that makes the weight feel different, even if it's the same. Claire had left on a Sunday. Not dramatically. That was the part that still snagged in him sometimes, even now when he allowed himself to think about it. There had been no shouting, no slamming doors. Just a suitcase and a conversation so quiet and so final that he'd found himself nodding along to the end of his own marriage as though it were a business decision. "I love you," she'd said, "but I can't stay in a life that feels this small." He hadn't argued. He hadn't known how to argue with something that felt, in the worst part of him, like the truth. Halverson Tool and Die paid him $19.40 an hour. He worked 5 days a week, sometimes 6 when Gruber needed overtime covered, which Patrick always volunteered for, because overtime was $29.10 an hour, and Rosie's winter boots had a crack forming along the left sole. He was the kind of man who noticed things like that. Cracks in soles, the wobble in the second kitchen drawer, the way the radiator in Rosie's room took 11 minutes longer than it should to heat up on cold mornings. He was the kind of man who fixed what he could and quietly carried what he couldn't. The apartment on Grover Lane was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been built in 1961 and not significantly updated since. The hallway smelled like the Morales family's cooking. Something with cumin, something that always made Patrick slightly hungry. And the carpet runner on the stairs had been patched in 2 places with duct tape. His apartment was small, a living room that doubled as a dining room, a kitchen with a window that faced the brick wall of the next building. 2 bedrooms, though bedroom was generous for the room Rosie slept in. It had fit her toddler bed, and then her twin, and now her drawings covered every inch of the wall above the headboard. Horses, mostly. She had never seen a real horse. She was saving them, she'd explained, for when she was older. He didn't own the apartment. He didn't own much of anything. The truck in the lot behind the building was a 2009 Silverado with 187,000 miles on it, and a heating element on the driver's side that quit working every winter and had to be coaxed back to life by parking in direct sunlight for 40 minutes. He had a checking account with $340 in it as of this morning. He had a Rosie, and the yellow jacket, and the 14 blocks, and the hand in his. Most days that felt like enough. Most days. There were moments, not often, and he would not have admitted to them freely, when the evenings got very quiet. After Rosie was bathed and read to and finally asleep, when the apartment contracted around him and the sounds of the building settled in. Upstairs footsteps, a television through the wall, the radiator ticking. There were moments when Patrick sat at the kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold and felt something he didn't have a name for. Not loneliness exactly. He knew what loneliness felt like. This was different. This was more like standing outside a lit window and not being sure whether you were looking in or out. He never let it stay long. He would rinse the mug, check on Rosie one more time, and go to bed. He was good at moving through things without lingering in them. He'd learned it the way most people learn the things they survive. Slowly, without noticing. Then until one day it was just the way he was. Friday mornings, he dropped Rosie at his neighbor Greta's before school. Greta was 63 and retired and genuinely seemed to enjoy the company, and Rosie adored her in the uncomplicated way children adore old women who always have something baking. Then he drove the 20 minutes to Halverson, punched in at 7 o'clock, and spent 8 hours operating a precision lathe that required more concentration than people assumed. He was good at the job, had been there 6 years. His supervisor, a quiet man named Billings, had told him twice that his numbers were the best on the floor. Neither time had come with a raise. He'd noted that. He hadn't said anything about it. That was also just the way he was. That Tuesday, 3 weeks before the doorway, before the rain, before Lena Farrell stood on his porch and offered him everything he'd been telling himself he didn't need. Patrick Hale walked his daughter home from school through the wet, listened to her theory about frogs, and made her scrambled eggs for dinner because the grocery run wasn't until Thursday. She ate them with ketchup, which he personally found unconscionable, but he let it go. They read 2 chapters of Charlotte's Web, her choice for the 3rd time this month, and he turned off her lamp at 8:15 and sat in the kitchen afterward with his cold tea and his quiet, and the particular weight of a life that was, by any honest measure, a good one, and didn't feel it. He met her on a Wednesday, not the Wednesday after, not some Wednesday he'd been building toward. Just a Wednesday, gray and unremarkable, the kind that existed only to separate Tuesday from Thursday. And he almost didn't stop. He was pulling out of the Halverson lot at 3:47, running the calculation in his head the way he always did. 20 minutes to Greta's, 7 minutes to school, pick up at 4:15, grocery run if he was quick, home by 5:30 to start dinner. He had it timed the way a man who cannot afford mistakes learns to time things. Down to the minute, with no slack built in because slack was a luxury. He turned onto Brentwood Avenue and saw her on the sidewalk near the bus shelter. She was standing still in a way that registered wrong. Not waiting. People waiting for a bus have a particular posture, a patient lean, a phone in hand. This was different. She was standing the way people stand when they've stopped because they don't know what comes next. Her car was pulled halfway onto the curb 20 feet ahead of her, the hazards blinking orange in the gray afternoon. She was in heels, actual heels, the kind that belonged in an office or a boardroom, not on the cracked sidewalk of Brentwood Avenue. And a coat that looked expensive in the way that made it look completely out of place here. She was staring at the front tire, which was flat in the absolute irreversible way. Not losing air. Gone. Patrick drove past her. He got 40 feet down the road. Then he pulled over. He would not have been able to explain it if someone had asked. He didn't know her. She wasn't in any visible danger. She had a phone. He'd seen it in her hand. There were a dozen reasons to keep driving, and exactly one reason to stop. And it wasn't a reason so much as the absence of one. He simply couldn't think of a version of himself that drove past a woman standing alone in the rain and felt fine about it afterward. He put the truck in park and got out. She turned when she heard the door. Up close she was. He registered this and then set it aside, the way a practical man sets aside information that isn't immediately useful. Striking. Dark hair pulled back from a face that was composed and guarded, and, underneath both of those things, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the flat tire. She was somewhere in her mid-30s, maybe. She held herself like someone accustomed to being the most capable person in any room, which made the helplessness of her current situation seem to cost her something. "I can take a look at it," Patrick said. She studied him with frank, assessing eyes. "I've already called roadside assistance." "How long did they say?" A pause. 45 minutes. "I can have it changed in 15. She looked at him for a moment longer. The kind of look that was making a calculation he wasn't entirely sure he passed. And then she looked back at the tire. "I have a spare," she said. "But I'm not." She stopped, started again. "I don't know where the jack is." "Under the bed, usually. For this model?" He walked to the back of the car, crouched down, found the panel. Yeah, it's here. Her name was Lena Farrell. He didn't learn that until later. In that first 15 minutes, he learned only that she worked nearby. She gestured vaguely north, which could have meant any of 4 buildings. That she had come from a meeting that had, from the set of her jaw, not gone well, and that she was not the kind of woman who was comfortable being helped. She stood back while he worked, and he could feel her wanting to say something useful and not having anything to offer. And the discomfort of that was visible in the precise, controlled way she wasn't fidgeting. You don't have to stay, he said, working the lug nuts. I've got it. I'm not going to just stand there while you... She stopped. It seems rude. It's fine. I have a 6-year-old. I'm used to doing things while someone watches and occasionally hands me the wrong tool. Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile, not quite, but the architecture of one. She hands you the wrong tool? Enthusiastically, every time. He loosened the last nut. She's very confident about it. The almost smile held for a moment. Then it went back wherever she kept it, and she looked away, and they finished in something that wasn't quite silence. The rain, the hazards ticking, the sounds of traffic on the wet road. 14 minutes. When he was done, he stood up and she said, "What do I owe you?" In a tone that was brisk and automatic, the tone of someone who had learned to convert gratitude into transaction because transaction was cleaner. Nothing. She frowned. Don't be... I have to pick up my daughter, he said simply, because it was true and because it ended the conversation without making her feel dismissed. He wiped his hands on the shop rag he kept behind the seat. Cancel the roadside call so they don't come for nothing. He got back in the truck. He was 3 blocks away before he realized he hadn't told her his name. He didn't think about her again that evening. He picked up Rosie, who informed him at length about an injustice involving a crayon, and he made pasta with the sauce from the jar because it was a Wednesday, and Wednesdays didn't have energy for anything more ambitious. He gave Rosie her bath, read her 1 chapter of Charlotte's Web because she had school the next morning, and went to bed at 10:20. He did not think about the woman in the heels on Brentwood Avenue, or the quality of her exhaustion, or the almost smile she'd kept to herself. He was certain of this. He saw her again on Friday. He was coming out of the hardware store on Clement Street. The grip tape on Rosie's scooter handle had peeled and needed replacing, $3.49. He'd budgeted it. When she came out of the coffee place next door, cup in hand, and nearly walked into him. They both stopped. She recognized him first. Something moved across her face. Surprise, and then briefly something warmer before the composure came back. The mechanic, she said. The flat tire, he replied. A beat. Around them, Clement Street moved. A mother with a stroller, 2 men arguing about parking, the smell of rain coming again from the west. I canceled the roadside call, she said, in case you were wondering. I wasn't, he said. But good. She almost smiled again. Same almost. Same place she kept it. Lena, she said, and held out her hand. Patrick. They shook hands the way strangers do when they're not quite strangers anymore but haven't decided what else to be. Briefly, correctly, with the slight awkwardness of people who have skipped a step and are not sure how to go back and take it. Thank you, she said. Properly this time. I don't think I said it properly. You said it fine. I was managing myself. He looked at her. I know, he said. It's fine. She held his gaze for a moment too long, then looked down at her coffee cup. Well, she said. Okay, he agreed. She turned and walked in the direction of wherever she worked, north, somewhere with tall windows and difficult meetings. He stood on the sidewalk outside the hardware store with his grip tape and watched her go without meaning to, just for a moment, just long enough to know that he would not entirely not think about her this time. Then he went home to fix the scooter. He ran into her again the following Tuesday. And the Tuesday after that. And once on a Thursday, outside the dry cleaner on Marsh Street, which was not on either of their obvious routes to anywhere. A coincidence so statistically improbable that Patrick noticed it and then deliberately did not examine it too closely, because examining it would require admitting something he wasn't ready to admit. They were becoming, without any formal agreement, people who talked. Not for long. Never for long. 5 minutes outside a coffee shop. 8 minutes on a bench near the Clement Street bus stop where Lena sometimes waited, though Patrick never saw her actually board a bus. She always had the coffee cup. She always had the composure. And underneath the composure, visible only in the pauses between sentences, in the way she sometimes looked at her phone and then put it away without responding to whatever she'd seen, there was something careful being managed. Something she was not going to discuss. He didn't ask. He recognized managed things. And he managed things himself. What he learned, piece by piece in those sidewalk minutes. She had moved to this neighborhood 8 months ago, from somewhere she referred to only as before. She worked in consulting, which she described in a tone that suggested she found it accurate but insufficient. She had no family nearby. She ran in the mornings, which explained the muscle in her posture that coexisted oddly with the boardroom clothes. She read novels the way other people took medication. Consistently, and because things went badly without it. She had opinions about Rain. Strong ones. What she learned about him. Whatever he offered, which was more than he usually did, and which surprised him each time. He told her about Halverson, about the lathe, about Billings and the numbers and the raise that never materialized. She'd listened with a quality of attention he wasn't accustomed to, not the polite attention of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but the real kind, the kind that had weight to it. "Have you asked for it?" she said. "The raise. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You walk in and you say the number. Easy to say when—" He stopped himself. She looked at him. When what? Nothing. She let it go, but not before he saw her register what he hadn't finished saying. When you've never needed a job so badly you couldn't afford to annoy the person who owned it. She hadn't pushed. He'd given her credit for that. The walls, when they showed themselves clearly. Hers came up the second time he suggested anything that resembled a plan. Not dinner. He wasn't ready for that word. And he sensed she wasn't either. But coffee, once, inside, seated, with intent. He'd said it lightly. "There's a place on Ferris that does a good Americano if you ever have." And she'd smiled the full smile for the first time, the real one, which was warm enough that it startled him slightly, and then she'd said, "I'll keep that in mind," which was the language of someone filing something away rather than accepting it. He hadn't pushed. His own walls were less visible but deeper. Claire had left on a Sunday 2 years ago, not the dramatic version he sometimes almost wished for, because drama would have given him something to be angry at. Just a suitcase and a quiet conversation and the hollow sound of the door closing correctly. The way well-maintained doors close, without drama, without sticking. "I love you," she'd said. "But I can't stay in a life that feels this small." He'd nodded. He'd helped her carry the second bag to her sister's car. He'd stood on the curb until the car turned the corner and then gone back upstairs to make Rosie's lunch for the next day, because it was Sunday evening and Rosie had school in the morning. And what else do you do? He didn't tell Lena this. Not yet. But he thought about it more than he usually let himself, in the evenings after Rosie was asleep, in the particular silence of the apartment on Grover Lane, with the cold tea and the lit window feeling. He was being careful. He knew he was being careful. He suspected she was too. It was Rosie who broke it open, the way children break things open, without warning, without apology, out. with the devastating accuracy of someone who hasn't yet learned that some questions are not supposed to be asked. It happened on a Saturday. Patrick had taken Rosie to the small park on Clement Street, the one with the climbing frame and the perpetually broken swing on the left, and was sitting on the bench when Lena appeared on the path that ran along the east side. She was in running clothes, cooling down, earbuds around her neck. She saw him and slowed. They were doing the thing they did, standing near each other, talking in the way that was both natural and faintly charged, the way of two people who have not decided what they are. When Rosie came off the climbing frame and materialized at Patrick's elbow, she looked at Lena with the frank, unguarded assessment of a 6-year-old. "Are you my dad's friend?" she asked. I am," Lena said, and something in her voice was different in the open air, softer. She crouched down to Rosie's level. "What's your name?" "Rosie. What's yours?" "Lena." Rosie considered this with appropriate gravity. "That's a nice name. It sounds like a color." "Does it? Which one?" Rosie thought about it. "Like a warm one, like the inside of something." Patrick watched Lena receive this, watched the composure do something complicated. She held Rosie's gaze for a moment, and there was something in her face, unguarded, sudden, that he had not seen there before. Something that looked almost like grief, and then almost like longing, and then was carefully, quietly put away. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me," Lena said. Rosie seemed satisfied with this. "Do you want to see me do the monkey bars? I can do 4 now. I would very much like to see that." Rosie ran. Lena stood up slowly, and they both watched her cross the rubber matting toward the bars. The yellow jacket, the determined face, the arms reaching. "She's extraordinary," Lena said quietly. "Yeah? She looks at things the same way you do." He turned to look at her. She was still watching Rosie, and he couldn't see her expression fully, only the line of her jaw and the way she was holding herself with slightly more precision than usual, which he had learned was what she did when something was costing her. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask. What happened? Before? Wherever before is." A long pause. Rosie made it across the monkey bars and turned, triumphant. They both raised their hands, and Rosie beamed and immediately turned back for another attempt. "Something I built," Lena said finally, "and then had to walk away from, and I'm still deciding what that makes me. It makes you someone who walked away from something hard. Or someone who ran. Sometimes those are the same thing." She looked at him then, directly, fully, without the composure in front of it. Just her. Just the thing underneath. And for 4 seconds, maybe 5, neither of them said anything, and the park went on around them, and Rosie called out, "Did you see? Did you see? I did it again?" And they both turned, and by the time they turned back, the moment had passed. But it had happened. They had both felt it happen. He asked her for coffee on a Wednesday evening. Not the light version this time. Yeah, not "There's a place on Ferris if you ever have," with the door left open for her to walk through or not. This time he said, "There's a place on Ferris. Thursday at 7 if you want. A door with a frame around it. A specific time. The kind of asking that cost something." She looked at him for a moment on the sidewalk outside the dry cleaner, her coat collar up against the October wind, and said, "Okay, Thursday at 7. Just like that, as though she'd been waiting for him to ask it properly. The place on Ferris was called Alderton's, and it had been there since 1987 and showed no signs of having changed its mind about anything since. The booths were dark wood. The lighting was the warm amber of somewhere that understood evenings. It smelled like ground coffee and something baked, and the woman behind the counter, whose name was apparently Dot, called Patrick Hahn with the ease of long familiarity, which made Lena raise an eyebrow when they sat down. You come here a lot, she said, not a question. Friday mornings mostly, after drop-off. He opened the menu he didn't need. Dot gives Rosie a cookie whenever I bring her. Rosie has therefore decided this is the best place on earth. High praise. She also gave that ranking to the car wash on Delancey, so the bar is somewhat flexible. Lena smiled. The full smile. The real one. The warm one. She looked down at the menu. He watched her do it and felt the particular, slightly dangerous sensation of wanting to make her do it again. They ordered. Americano for her, black coffee for him, and a slice of the walnut cake that Dot brought unrequested. I'd setting it between them with the authority of someone who had decided the matter. She decided, Patrick said. I see that. I'd eat it if I were you. She takes it personally. Lena took a forkful with the gravity of someone accepting a diplomatic arrangement. Her expression shifted. That's genuinely good. I know. For a while they talked the way they'd been talking on sidewalks. Easy, glancing, neither of them reaching for anything too deep. The consulting work, which she described with increasing specificity the more comfortable she got, until he had a clearer picture. She advised companies in restructuring, walked into broken things and figured out what could be saved. Which is a polite way of saying I tell people what they don't want to hear, she said. Oh, and then charge them for the privilege. And do they listen? Sometimes. A pause. Less than you'd hope. Is that why you left? Before? She turned the coffee cup in her hands. He watched her decide how much to give him. Partly, she said. I was a partner at a firm. We had a client, a large one, and I found something in their accounts that my senior partners wanted me to not find. And I found it anyway. She said it simply, without drama. Formally, on record, which ended a very significant contract and made me, for about 6 months, the most unpopular person in a 12-story building. But you were right. I was right. She looked at him. That's not always the protection you think it's going to be. He nodded slowly. He understood that, and the specific loneliness of being right in a room full of people who needed you to be wrong. He understood it in a smaller, quieter way, the way a man understands it from the floor of a factory rather than the floor of a boardroom. But he understood it. Is that when you moved here? 6 months later, when it was finished and I needed to be somewhere that didn't know what I'd looked like before. Before what? She was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed with its headlights cutting through the rain-streaked window. Before I stopped trusting my own judgment about people, she said, there was someone, at the firm. I thought... She stopped. Started again, more carefully. I thought he saw what I saw, about the client, about the right thing, and he didn't, or he did, and he chose the other thing anyway. And I couldn't. I wasn't able to. She picked up her cup. I couldn't tell the difference until it was too late. That's the part that stayed with me. The amber light sat between them. Patrick turned his coffee cup once on its saucer. Can I ask you something? Lena said. You can ask. Why are you kind to me? He looked up. She was watching him with direct, undefended eyes. The real ones, the ones without the composure in front of them. And he could see it cost her to ask. Not the asking itself, but what it admitted. That she had noticed. That it had mattered. That she wasn't entirely sure she deserved it. He thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. I don't think I'm especially kind, he said. I think I don't know. I've had people be decent to me when they didn't have to be. And I've had people not be. And the difference between those two things is larger than people think. That's not an answer. No. He paused. I think you looked like someone who was carrying something and hadn't put it down in a long time. And I recognize that. Not because I'm kind, because I know what it looks like. She held his gaze for a moment. How long did you carry yours? Still carrying it, he said. It gets lighter, but it doesn't go away. Claire? He'd mentioned the name once, weeks ago, in passing. She'd remembered it. He felt that land somewhere in him. Claire, he confirmed. She left 2 years ago. She said, he turned the cup again. She said our life felt small. And I've spent 2 years trying to figure out if she was wrong, or if I just don't know how to want more than what I have. Which do you think it is? I think, he said slowly, that she needed something I didn't know how to give her. And I think that's different from the life being small. I think that's just two people who loved each other in ways that didn't quite fit. Lena was quiet. Outside, the rain had started properly now, coming down the way it did in November, committed and unhurried. I think that's a very generous way to understand it, she said. It took a long time to get there. I imagine. She looked at her cup. I'm not there yet. With mine. You don't have to be. No? But I'd like to be. She looked up. I'd like to be able to... She stopped, and something crossed her face that he recognized from the park, from the moment after Rosie's monkey bars, from the 5 seconds of silence that had passed between them and not been nothing. I'd like to stop assuming the worst about people's motives, about what they want from me. What do you think I want from you? She looked at him steadily. I don't know, she said. That's the thing. I don't know, and I can't find the angle, and that either means you don't have one, or I've lost the ability to see it. And I can't tell which one frightens me more. He held her gaze. There's no angle, he said. I know, she said quietly. I think that's why I came tonight. Dot came by and refilled the coffee without asking. The walnut cake was almost gone. Outside, Ferris Street shone wet and amber under the streetlights, and neither of them reached for their coats. She stopped coming. Not all at once. That would have been easier to understand. A clean line, a door closed, something to point to. Instead, it was gradual, and therefore more confusing. The way temperature drops are more confusing than slammed windows. The Thursday after Alderton's, she texted to say she had a client call that ran late. He said no problem and meant it. The following Tuesday, she wasn't at the bus stop on Clement Street, which wasn't an arrangement exactly, just a place they'd both been at the same time enough times that her absence registered. The Thursday after that, he waited on Ferris Street outside the hardware store for 11 minutes. Not waiting, he told himself, just standing. And she didn't appear. He stopped standing on Ferris Street. He told himself it was fine. He told himself this was the thing he'd known was coming. The thing sensible people anticipated when they sat across from someone like Lena Farrell in the amber light of Alderton's, and said things like there's no angle and watched her eyes do what they did when something reached her. He'd reached her, and she'd retreated. And that was the natural order of things between people who had both been hurt in ways that left the wiring unreliable. He told himself this at the kitchen table with the cold tea. It helped approximately as much as cold tea usually helps. Rosie noticed on a Saturday. They were in the park, the one with the climbing frame, the broken swing, the rubber matting. And she was on the monkey bars, which she could now do in both directions, a development she considered significant enough to announce to strangers. She came off the end and landed with a thump and looked up at the bench where Patrick was sitting and then looked at the space beside him. Where's Lena? She's busy today, Bug. Rosie absorbed this with the unsatisfying acceptance of a child who suspects a better answer exists. She climbed back up, came back down, stood in front of him with her hands on her hips. Is she still your friend? Yes. Then why don't you call her? He looked at his daughter. 6 years old, small in the yellow jacket, delivering verdict with the absolute authority of someone who had not yet learned to complicate the simple things. "It's not always that straightforward," he said. "Why not?" "Because adults are strange." Rosie considered this. "You should call her," she said, with the finality of someone who had ruled and would not be taking questions. Then she went back to the monkey bars. He did not call her that afternoon. He called her on a Sunday evening. He'd spent Saturday night and most of Sunday moving through the apartment, doing the things the apartment required. A loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet, the bathroom grout that needed resealing, the grocery run, Rosie's school bag prepared for Monday. He was good at filling time with necessary things. He had made it an art form. But by Sunday at 6, with Rosie asleep over a book in the armchair and the radiator doing its 11-minute warm-up, he ran out of necessary things and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the phone. He thought about what Lena had said at Alderton's. "I'd like to stop assuming the worst about people's motives." He thought about what he hadn't said back, that the only way to stop assuming the worst was to let someone close enough to prove they weren't the worst, and that every day you didn't was a day you'd chosen the wall over the window. He picked up the phone. 3 rings. 4. He was constructing a voicemail in his head. Easy, undemanding, the kind that didn't require anything. When she answered. "Patrick." "Hi." He paused. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." A silence that was not quite empty. "I'm all right," she said. "Good." Another pause. He heard something in the background. A window or a television turned low, or just the particular acoustics of a person sitting alone in an apartment trying to decide how honest to be. "I'm sorry," she said, "for disappearing." "You don't have to." "I do. Actually." Her voice was steady but careful, the way voices are when something underneath them isn't entirely. "I got scared, and when I get scared, I manage my exposure, which is a very professional way of saying I went away." "I noticed." "I know you did." A breath. "That's part of what scared me." He turned his coffee cup on the table. "What was the other part?" A long pause. Long enough that he wondered if he'd overreached. Then, "There's something I haven't told you. About before. About what I left." She stopped. It's nothing that should matter to you the way you mean. It's just something that changes the context of things. And I've been trying to figure out whether to tell you because telling you feels like it opens something I'm not sure I know how to manage. You don't have to tell me anything. I know. Quietly. That's also part of the problem. He didn't push. He sat with it, and she sat with it, and the radiator clicked, and somewhere in the apartment, Rosie shifted in her sleep. "There's a work thing," Lena said finally. "Next week, Thursday evening. It's a dinner for a client, and it's going to be difficult, and I don't entirely want to go, and I thought..." She stopped. "Started differently. I thought about asking if you'd want to come. And then I thought about all the reasons that was a bad idea, and I almost talked myself out of calling you entirely, and then you called me, which I find annoying? Inconvenient," she said, and then he could hear the warmth in it. "Because now I have to ask in person. Would you want to come? Thursday. It's formal. I know that's... I have a suit," he said. "You don't have to. Lena." "Yes? I have a suit. What time?" He had a suit, technically. It was 4 years old, bought for his cousin's wedding, and it had spent those 4 years in a dry cleaning bag in the back of the bedroom closet. He tried it on Monday morning after dropping Rosie at school and stood in front of the bathroom mirror in it and found it still fit mostly, across the shoulders perhaps a little more than before from the Halverson work, but wearable. He looked at himself for a moment in the way a man looks at himself when he's being honest about what he sees. The lines at the corners of his eyes, at the gray coming in at the temples that had not been there 2 years ago, the general evidence of a life that had required more than it had returned. He thought about what Claire had said. A life that feels this small. He thought about Rosie asking, "Is she still your friend with her hands on her hips?" He thought about Lena's voice on Sunday evening, careful and warm and frightened and trying. And the particular quality of someone who was not running toward him yet, but had turned around to face the direction he was standing. He took the suit to the dry cleaner on Marsh Street on Tuesday. He paid the $18.50 and did not calculate what else it could have covered. On Wednesday afternoon, one day before the dinner, he got a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Hale, my name is Jeffrey Strand. I'm the senior managing partner at Farrell Strand Capital. I think we need to talk about Lena before Thursday evening. It's important that you understand some things about who she is before you walk into that room." Patrick read it twice. He set the phone face down on the kitchen counter. He stood there for a long moment, looking at nothing, while the radiator ticked and the building settled, and somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed. Then he picked the phone back up. He didn't respond to Jeffrey Strand. Not that night. Not the next morning. He set the phone face down and left it there and went about the business of Wednesday evening. Rosie's dinner, her bath, 2 chapters of the book, the lamp off at 8:15. And when he came back to the kitchen, the message was still there, odd waiting with the particular patience of things designed to unsettle. He read it a third time. "I think we need to talk about Lena before Thursday evening. It's important that you understand some things about who she is before you walk into that room." He thought about what Lena had said at Alderton's. "There's something I haven't told you about before." He thought about the careful way she'd said it. Not evasive, exactly, but measured. The way someone measures something fragile. He thought about the text and the name, Farrell Strand Capital, and the word senior managing partner, and the way those 3 words did not fit the picture he'd been assembling of a woman who ran alone in the mornings and ordered Americanos and had moved somewhere no one knew what she'd looked like before. Farrell. Her name was in the company name. He looked that up. It took 4 minutes. Farrell Strand Capital managed $2.3 billion in assets. It had been founded 11 years ago by 2 partners, Jeffrey Strand and Lena Farrell. There were photographs. Lena in a different life, sharper, more formal, standing in front of things that cost a great deal of money, wearing the expression of someone who had not yet learned to keep it somewhere private. There were articles. A profile in a financial publication from 3 years ago. Farrell Strand's quiet powerhouse. A brief item from 18 months ago, a single paragraph, noting that Lena Farrell had stepped back from day-to-day operations at the firm she co-founded. No further detail. The kind of absence of detail that is itself a detail. He closed the browser. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then he texted Strand back. "I'll be there Thursday." The dinner was at a restaurant called Hessler's, the kind of place that didn't have prices on the menu because the people who ate there didn't consult menus for that information. Patrick wore the suit. He'd had his hair cut that afternoon at the place on Delancey that charged $12, and Greta, dropping Rosie back after school, had looked at him with the particular expression of an older woman who has decided something and is keeping it to herself. He arrived at 7:05. Lena was already inside. She was at the bar, and she turned when he came through the door, and for a moment, just a moment, something crossed her face that had nothing managed about it. Relief, maybe. Or the specific expression of someone who had not been entirely sure he would come and had been more affected by that uncertainty than they'd wanted to be. She was in a dark dress, and she looked, in the honest way he allowed himself to be honest about such things, extraordinary. Not in the way of the photographs online, not the armor of it, but something realer, something that knew the cost of things. "You came," she said. "I said I would." She studied him for a half-second. "You look," she stopped. "You got a haircut. $12. It looks good." Greta agreed. She almost smiled. Then her eyes moved past him toward the door, and the almost smile went somewhere else entirely. Patrick turned. Jeffrey Strand was not what the name suggested. He was 60, compact, silver-haired, with the tanned face of someone who spent meaningful time on boats. He wore his authority the way expensive things wear their expense. Quietly, completely. He came across the room with his hand already extended and his eyes already on Patrick in the assessing way of a man accustomed to assessing things quickly and accurately. "Mr. Hale?" "Mr. Strand." Lena had gone very still beside him. "I texted you," Strand said. Not an apology. "I got it." "I wasn't sure you would come once you had." "I'm here," Patrick said simply. Strand looked at him for a moment longer. Then he looked at Lena with an expression that was complex and old. Not hostile, which Patrick had prepared for, but something more like grief wearing the clothes of resignation. "Lena," he said, "you look well." "Jeffrey." Her voice was level and cool and cost her something to keep that way. The dinner was 12 people at a long table. Clients Patrick didn't know, and colleagues Lena clearly did. And he sat beside her and watched her work the room in the way she worked things. With precision, with warmth kept carefully metered, with the absolute competence of someone who had built something significant and knew every inch of the architecture. He could see it now, fully, in this context. The woman from the sidewalk on Brentwood Avenue was not a woman who had been diminished by what happened to her. She was a woman who had walked away from something enormous by choice and was still deciding whether the choice had cost her the right amount. Strand sat across the table. He said little. He watched Lena with the expression of a man who had something to return and wasn't certain he'd be permitted to. After the main course, he said it. Quietly to the table, but clearly. "I want to acknowledge something, if I may." 18 months ago, Lena identified a significant compliance issue with one of our clients. I disagreed with her assessment, or rather, I understood her assessment and chose not to act on it, which is a distinction I've had considerable time to examine. He paused. "She was right. The client is currently under federal investigation. Our firm has been cleared of involvement, largely because Lena's documentation was thorough enough to demonstrate our awareness of the issue. Awareness I did not act on, but that she recorded anyway." He looked at her directly. "I owe you a public acknowledgement of that. Yeah, and considerably more." The table was very quiet. Lena held Strand's gaze with an expression Patrick recognized. The one that was not quite composed. The one that lived just underneath the composure. The one she wore when something real was reaching her, and she was deciding whether to let it. "Thank you, Jeffrey," she said. Steady. Final. A door closed correctly. Afterward, outside on the wet street, the dinner done, the other guests dispersed into cabs and cars. Patrick and Lena stood on the pavement and the rain came down the way it had been coming down all week. Steady, unhurried, committed. She turned to him. "You knew. Before tonight." "Some of it." "He texted you." "Yes? And you came anyway?" "Yes." She looked at him with the real eyes, the unguarded ones. "Why?" He thought about it the way the question deserved. "Because whatever he was going to tell me was his version, and I'd rather have yours." Something moved across her face that he had not seen there before. Not the almost smile, not the warmth behind the composure, but something more fundamental than both. Something that looked like a person setting something down that had been heavy for a long time. "Farrell Strand," she said. "I built half of that. I know. I walked away from $2.3 billion worth of something I built because I wouldn't let it be used the wrong way." She said it plainly, not for effect. "I'm not. I want you to know that I'm not telling you that so you'll think something particular about me. I'm telling you because you've been kind to me without knowing it, and that felt..." She stopped. "It felt dishonest. To let you keep doing that without knowing." "Lena." "Yes?" "I would have fixed the tire regardless," he said. The number of zeros doesn't change that. She stood very still in the rain. Her hair was getting wet, and she didn't reach for anything to fix it. And that small surrender, that tiny, ordinary unguardedness, undid him more than anything that had happened inside. "I know," she said softly. "That's the whole problem." He drove her home. Not because she couldn't get a cab. She could, easily. There were 3 idling outside Hessler's when they came out. But because she'd looked at the rain, and then at him, and said, "Would that be all right?" in the voice she used when she was asking for something she wasn't certain she was allowed to want. He'd said yes and walked her to the Silverado and unlocked it with the key because the fob had stopped working in September, and he hadn't replaced the battery yet, and she got in without commenting on any of it. They drove through the wet city, and she looked out the window, and he drove. And neither of them filled the silence because the silence had become, somewhere over the past weeks, a place they could both exist without it demanding anything. She lived on Alderton Street. He hadn't known that. It was 3 blocks from the coffee place. He pulled up outside a building that was quieter and more substantial than his own, and he put the truck in park and left the engine running because the heater needed the engine and the night was cold. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight. It was a good dinner. It was a complicated dinner." "Yes." He paused. "Are you all right with what Strand said?" She considered it honestly, which was the only way she considered things. "I think so. I think I needed to hear it said in a room. Not because it changes what happened, but because..." She turned the clasp on her bag, once, twice. "I've been carrying the version where maybe I was wrong. Where maybe the cost of being right was too high, and I should have found another way. And hearing him say it doesn't take the cost back, but it means it wasn't mine to carry alone. It was never yours to carry alone." She looked at him. "You couldn't have known that then." "No, but I know it now." The rain came down on the windshield and the wipers moved and the city went on around them. Indifferent and wet and entirely uninterested in the 2 people in the old Silverado on Alderton Street who were running out of reasons not to say the thing they had been not saying for 6 weeks. "Patrick." "Yes." "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly, even if the honest answer is..." She stopped. Started again. "Even if it's complicated." "All right." She turned in the seat to face him fully. In the amber light of the street lamp through the rain-streaked windshield, she looked like herself. Entirely, without management, without the composure in front of it. Just the woman who had stood on a cracked sidewalk in the wrong shoes and not known how to be helped. What is this? For you. What is this? He held her gaze. "Yes, you know what this is?" "I need to hear you say it." "Why?" "Because I've been wrong before about what I thought something was, and I can't..." Her voice was steady, but the steadiness cost her. "I can't afford to build something on an assumption again." He turned the key and cut the engine. The heater died with it, and the cold began slowly, gently to enter. He turned in his seat. "This," he said quietly, "is the first time in 2 years I've sat in a car outside someone's building and not wanted to drive away. That's what this is." She held his gaze, and the thing that moved across her face this time was not complicated at all. It was simple, the kind of simple that lives on the other side of something very hard. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay," he said. She got out of the car, stood on the pavement, and turned back and held the door a moment, rain falling on her hair and her shoulders and the dark coat, and looked at him with the open eyes. "Ask me to stay," she said, "and I will." He heard it land, the weight of it, the full weight, everything it meant and everything it required. He heard it, and he felt it, and he sat with it for what was probably 4 seconds and felt like considerably longer. And in those 4 seconds, he thought about Rosie asleep in the apartment on Grover Lane, about the yellow jacket and the 14 blocks and the cold tea and the lit window, About Claire's suitcase on a Sunday and the door closing correctly. About a truck with 187,000 miles and a suit from a cousin's wedding and $11 until Friday. About a woman who had walked away from $2.3 billion because she wouldn't let it be used wrong, who ordered Americanos and ran in the mornings and kept her smile somewhere private and had told his daughter that her name sounded like a warm color. He opened his mouth, and then his phone rang. He looked at it. Greta. 11:34 at night. His chest tightened in the specific way that parental chests tighten when phones ring at 11:34 at night. He answered it. Patrick. Greta's voice, careful and calm in the way of someone being deliberately calm. Rosie woke up and she's got a fever. I've been checking on her every half hour, but it's up to 102 and she's asking for you. Everything else left the room of his attention immediately and completely. I'm coming, 15 minutes. He hung up, looked at Lena. She was watching him from the pavement with an expression that had already understood. Rosie, he said. Go, she said. No hesitation. No performance of understanding. The real thing, immediate and uncomplicated. Go. Call me tomorrow. Lena. Patrick. Firm. Warm. She needs you. Go. He went. Rosie's fever broke at 3 a.m. He sat in the narrow chair beside her bed the whole time, the way he always sat. Not hovering, just present. Close enough that if she woke and reached out, her hand would find him. He'd done this before. The coughs that wouldn't go, the ear infections, the night terrors that came in waves when she was 4. He knew the particular quality of a sick child's sleep. The restlessness, the small sounds, the gradual deepening as the body begins to win. At 3:17, she opened her eyes. Dad. Hey, Bug. How do you feel? Hot. A pause. Then cold. That means it's breaking. That's good. She looked at him with the heavy, unfocused eyes of a child recently feverish. Were you there all night? Where else would I be? She seemed satisfied with this in the profound, uncomplicated way of someone who has never genuinely doubted the answer. She shifted under the blanket. Is Lena okay? He looked at his daughter. Yeah, he said. She's okay. Good. Her eyes were already closing again. She worries, Rosie murmured, mostly asleep. I can tell. I know, he said. Me too. She slept. He sat in the chair until the room began to go gray with morning, then made tea he didn't drink and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the alley and the slow arrival of a Thursday. The radiator clicked. The building settled. Somewhere below, a door opened and footsteps crossed the courtyard. He picked up the phone. It was 6:12 a.m. Too early. He texted anyway. Fever broke. She's sleeping. I'm sorry about last night. The reply came in 4 minutes, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either. Don't be. How is she? She'll be fine. She asked about you. A pause. Then, she did. First thing. Another pause, longer. I'm glad she's okay. And Patrick, what I said at the car. The offer stands, whenever you're ready. No expiry on it. He read it twice. Then he set the phone on the counter and looked out the window at the gray morning arriving over the alley, at the ordinary Thursday assembling itself from the ordinary materials. The light, the cold, the sounds of the building waking up. He still had to get Rosie to school, and he still had a shift at Halverson at 7 that he would have to call Billings about. He still had $11 until Friday and a heater fob that needed a new battery and a suit back in the dry cleaning bag in the closet. None of that had changed. Everything else had. He picked the phone back up. I'm ready, he typed. Come for dinner. Friday. Rosie wants to show you she can do the monkey bars in both directions. The reply came immediately, and he could feel the warmth of it through the screen. The real smile, the full one, the one she didn't keep anywhere anymore. I'll bring the walnut cake. He set the phone down and went to check on his daughter.